Please help us welcome our final speaker of the conference, Matt Mason. Matt is a Senior Vice President and Director of Talent Enablement at Truist Financial, and we are so honored to have him with us. Matt, the session is all yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Casey. Thank you, ELB. Um, I I am just privileged and honored to be here today, and I just want to start out with sort of this idea of we're really living in a challenging and very revealing time as we think about uh, leadership development. And um, so as I think about leadership development, I've had the opportunity to do that at different roles and different companies. I often start thinking not who gets placed, but who didn't get placed. And inside of that, number one, what is the thing that we should be learning from that? What is the learning? And so um, I want to take a little trip back in history here. And let me see, make sure. Can you see my thumbs up if you can see my screen? I want to make sure everybody can see my screen. Excellent. So it got me thinking about history and what can we learn from history. And the title of this is Leaders Who Carry Chairs. And in really thinking around the character, not of who was selected, of who was not selected, and how do we think as instructional designers and leadership development experts, how do we think about that as a way to develop our programs and talent and learning? And so I want to take you back to the year 1775. And all of us are in the room with the Continental Congress, and we're listening to what's going on. And the topic on the table, the agenda item is who is going to be selected to lead the Continental Army against the British forces that are in the US. And it's an interesting conversation, and lots of people are being thrown around in the conversation. On the left, Artemus Ward is on the table. Artemus is already commanding the New England Army around Boston. He is very well respected and probably the most logical choice if you look at everybody on paper. The second in the middle is Charles Lee, who's being considered. Professionally trained ex-British officer who's got big credentials, widely discussed as the contender, and early on with nearly everybody, he has their votes. Horatio Gates is our third, another ex-British officer, admired, politically connected, ambitious, connected with Congress. If you look at these three, you really see sort of this well-respected, well-connected, politically connected, on paper, strong individuals. But we all know that wasn't who was selected. We know that George Washington was selected. He's commander, but he's really the only one that the Continental Congress really feels can unify the colonies. He's got to bring in Virginia, and strategically, they felt was the guy. They knew this was going to be an uphill battle. They knew that the forces were not there. They were fighting a well-organized British group. It was going to be an interesting take. So let's just run through George Washington for a minute. So this guy gets picked. And we think about our own leadership development programs and who gets picked. And we often walk through succession planning and performance planning and think about those things. But George Washington, while he was picked, really didn't have the greatest of starts. So let's walk through that. So June 15th, 1775, he gets appointed as commander-in-chief to lead a poorly organized and equipped force against a disciplined British troop set. Let me read that again. He was put in place to direct a poorly organized and equip a force against a disciplined British troop set. Sounds awful lot like things we have been involved with in our own organizations, where we have to put somebody in place or develop a program around leadership development. So what's next for him? In March of 1776, he wins the siege of Boston, and everyone's thumbs up on George Washington. But then in November of that year, he has to retreat out of New York City, which was a major loss. And then comes probably the most decisive thing that George Washington does. He crosses the Delaware, and at 11 o'clock on Christmas night, snow piling up, a lot of people dying, poorly equipped forces, he makes the decision. He rallies his leaders together and says, we're going across the Delaware. And you've all seen the painting. He's holding, someone's holding the lantern, and they're going across in the boats. History predicts, if you read the books, that the other three guys would probably have never made that move. But most historians believe it was this move by George Washington. The character, the courage, the part that he played in this was what was the decisive win. He wins the Battle of Trenton in December 1776, followed by the Battle of Princeton in 1777. So he's got the British on their heels, but then he loses at Brandywine and Germantown in early 1777, wins Yorktown in 1781. We close out with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. He's got a lot of wins. He's got a ton of character, but he also has losses. But through all of that, I believe it's the character of George Washington that really carried him through. He goes on to become the first president of the United States, but even before that, he is president of the Constitutional Convention, where they draft the U.S. Constitution. He's the guy that brings in all of the big names: Thomas Jefferson, Hamilton. Those guys are in his cabinet, not only for the Constitution, but also when he gets elected as the first president in 1788 and then 1792. So we think about George Washington. We think about his selection. We think about the character. We also have a lot to learn about those that weren't selected. And so that's really, really important. And as we think about leadership development, we think about pipelining programs, most of us probably know that pipeline and succession planning typically rewards polish and visibility over service and impact. So today what I'd like to do is I would like to talk through the classic selection criteria, but I want to infuse this new concept around leaders who carry chairs. And I want to get into character, and I want to talk about that. Before we go any further, if we've not met before, my name is Matt Mason, and I have the privilege of leading an awesome team at Truist Financial, the 6th largest bank in the U.S. I've been in learning and development for about 30 years, and I hope you join me on LinkedIn in conversations that we have there. I publish a video or a writing 6 days a week, and it's really around learning and talent and servant leadership. I hope you join me there. I hope we can continue this conversation, not only about this particular topic, but other topics as we're going on. All right, so back to this conversation. So we have, as learning professionals and instructional designers, I think we have lots of tools. And so as instructional designers, how should we start thinking about things? How should we think about building leadership development programs or executing leadership development programs? And there's always sort of cultural elements in that, and we're going to talk about those today. I do want to talk about how I got here, though. How did I get to this place of thinking about this extra element in leadership development? And it has a lot to do with how I was raised. And in my elementary and middle school days, I played sports, and high school I played sports, and in those days we would have award ceremonies and we would have sports banquets, and it was a wonderful thing. And I remember a time sitting with my mom and my dad and my sister, and it was an awards banquet, and the awards banquet ended, and I popped up because my buddies were around and I wanted to go hang out with my buddies. My dad said, grab your folding chair, fold it up, grab your sister's, make sure it's folded, and follow me. And my dad had folded his chair up, and he folded my mom's chair up, and I followed him. And he was the only one that was doing this. And he walked over to where the folding chair rack was. And in those days, we didn't have these awesome padded chairs. They were these hard steel chairs. But there was typically a rack in the corner of the gym, and he hung his too, and then I hung mine, and I said, Dad, I, why are we doing this? There's nobody doing this, Dad. Like, get a clue. You know, as a stupid teenage boy, I was trying to flex on my dad a little bit. My dad, stop, and I'll never forget this. My dad looked at me and he said, son, leaders carry chairs. And that has stuck with me for a really long time. And it didn't really fully hit me then, and it hit me later that it was that influence in my life that we do things as leaders when no one is looking. And that's an important element. And I believe that's something we could do more and use more of in our lives. And so this is something that has stuck with me for a very long time, that leaders carry chairs, and I attribute this to my father. So as we think about leadership development, we often look at this typical framework. As we're developing leaders and we're selecting leaders, we look at two critical elements. The first is performance. The second is managerial. Performance, we typically look at metrics. We look at key performance indicators, KPIs, you name it. If it's measured, it's in this bucket. They typically look at it over time. These are typically strong leaders that deliver strong performance. How they get there, that's another conversation that we're going to have. The second, how they manage their teams. These are typically individuals that are put over large teams, large organizations. They have anywhere between 5 to 10 direct reports who have teams and teams of teams, and sometimes teams of teams of teams. And they're expected to deliver the performance through their teams, which is very different from a first-time leader or an individual contributor. And so we typically look at this type of framework. And my argument here is, I don't think this is enough. I think if all of us put in chat a leader, and I'm not asking you to do this, but a leader currently in history or over the last 5 years, who we all thought was a great leader or is a leader, but doesn't show often, or at the end of the day, the leadership characteristics we would want, we would say performance and managerial isn't enough. I believe there are intrinsic drivers that we have to consider in the selectable process. I think this is the secret sauce. And some of you are saying, well, my gosh, how would we even go about doing that? How would we measure that? Well, we're going to get there here in a minute. So what typically happens if you just look at performance, you just look at managerial, you get into some of these things, which we're terming here succession missteps or mishaps, right? The first is tenure trap. Oftentimes, the people get promoted are the people that have been there the longest. They're not the best leader. They don't show the greatest character, and they may not have the best performance. Just everybody knows who they are. The second is top performer fallacy. Just using data alone is not going to be enough. Remember, I said earlier, performance is great, but how you get there is important. I can beat and whip my team verbally. I can drive them with emails of all hours of the day, but that's not great character that helps drive performance. And so that's something we have to consider. And the other one is executive presence bias. The person that sits the closest to the person making the decision. The person that, quote, has the ear. How often have we heard that? And it's true that person typically gets a lot done and has a lot of favors. But as we're creating programs, as we're working on succession planning, these are things that we need to keep in mind that often take us off track if we just look at the two things. So let's dive into this secret sauce. Now, if you follow me on LinkedIn, and I hope you do, you know that I talk a lot about servant leadership. And that's actually how I got here today. I wrote a post, ELB read the post, and said, Matt, we want you to talk about it, which is typically a very uncommon thing. But I was flattered and honored, even though I have 30 years of learning and development, how I got here today is because of my servant leadership. So let's talk about that. So what we're going to talk about next is what I feel are the key elements of any servant leader, and let's break those down. So for me, this is the secret sauce. So how do we infuse culture and character into a succession model or a leadership development model? For me, it starts here with two parts of being a great servant leader. The first is intrinsic. It's who you are. You can develop these things. You can change these things. I believe that all the items on this list today are things that you can grow, you can develop in, you can become better in. Some of you may be better in one and not in another, but I'm here to tell you this is important. And I believe just like the oxygen mask conversation on an airplane, where the mask has to fall first, you have to put the mask on before you can help others. We have to start with ourselves. And so I would say any great leadership development program should always start with the focus on the intrinsic or internal characteristics of a particular leader. And the second is the extrinsic. Now that I'm working on myself and I'm bettering myself, how do I take what I know as a leader and how do I then extrinsically then lead, grow, and develop those that are in my care? So let's start here. Let's start with the intrinsic one because that's where it's at. As we go through this list, I'm going to go fairly quickly so we've got time at the end to talk. But I'm going to go through some lists of intrinsic items, and then after that, we're going to go through some extrinsic items. And on this list, we're going to talk about why it matters, why this particular element matters, how you'll know the behavior when you see this particular driver, and then outcomes. Can you measure it? And I believe the answer is yes. And I haven't found an assessment tool that does all of this yet. But I think there are different ways of capturing this information. Sometimes there's a little bit of an extrapolation, but I think we would all agree these are a step forward into being able to measure or quantify these characteristics. Let's take the first one, listening. This is one I'm not good at. I'll just be honest with you. I am a very driven person, and I often don't listen. And my mother used to tell me, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Remember that, and I don't. So why does it matter? So Robert Greenleaf, who is really the founder of servant leadership back in the early 70s and wrote the pinnacle book around servant leadership, says this is really the one you start with. And listening builds trust. It provides really the doorway into what's going on with those around you. Behavioral indicators. How do you know someone's actually listening? You can measure this and see this in one-on-one meetings. Do they hold them? What do the teammates say about their experience in the one-on-one meeting? Does the boss show up and have a list of agenda items and close the meeting out with 2 minutes to go and the person doesn't have that? You can ask questions about that. So you can look at psychological safety metrics in your employee engagement. So team, this is going to be your model as I go through the rest of these intrinsic drivers. The second driver is empathy, and I believe this is really important. It emphasizes understanding and empathizing with others, not rejecting the person or even when their behavior or performance may be unacceptable. This is me putting myself in and working to understand what's going on. What are the behaviors I would see? A leader that understands what's going on in someone's life. It could be something at home, it could be something at work, and adjusts the workload accordingly, often with the employee not having to ask for that. Outcomes. We would see this in turnover. We would see this in retention. We would see this in engagement scores. And so we can definitely get there. Let's look at number 3, awareness, self-awareness. Probably one of the biggest, most important elements right now as a servant leader in our culture and what we're going through. I've got to understand my own strengths and weaknesses. I've got to understand who I am as an individual, my biases, the environment I work in the best, the power dynamics around me. And so how do I get that? I would be asking for feedback. I would be asking for 360 opportunities. I would be emphasizing my strengths and working on my opportunities. And so what's the behaviors one would see? Journaling, after action reviews, peer feedback sessions. These things would come up. What outcomes we would see? We would see trust scores would be high, and the team would perceive their leader as authentic or trustworthy, which is a common question in employee engagement surveys. Number 4, healing. We often talk about caring in this one, and care is really important. And it's something I'm going to be focused on in 2026, because to me, care is, as defined, understanding an individual's need and then being willing to carry it. So don't say to somebody, I care for you, if you're not willing to understand and carry. If somebody says, boy, I'm having a really hard time paying the mortgage, I'm not asking you to pay the whole mortgage, but I am asking you to understand, and I am asking you to get involved if you truly think that you're going to care, or you do care, to help them out. Maybe it's making a meal. Maybe it's watching the kids so they can work extra shifts. Maybe it is you're going to help them out financially, but care is going that mile. And so individuals and servant leaders who work toward healing or caring for others are there to help restore the wholeness. And so, what do you expect to see from a behavior perspective? This is a leader who provides, who connects, and it is an individual who seeks to understand. They're going to make sure their team members have what they need. Outcomes: burnout's going to be lower, higher well-being score, and as setbacks occur with the team heals quickly because the leader understands the need and moves that forward. Number 5, humility, putting each other first. Humility, I think, is often misunderstood. They think somebody that is confident is often not humble, and I would say that's often not the case. So humility is around service. It's around caring first. It's, Robert Greenleaf, he emphasizes this as servant first. That doesn't make you a weak leader. It's just the priorities of where do you go as the decision's being made, or something has come up to be discussed, or needs to be moved forward. You're serving first. You want to understand those that you're serving and their perspective. You'll see this because leaders don't take credit for it. Leaders give credit way more than they're willing to take credit. And when someone gives them credit, they often say, hey, I couldn't have done this without my team. So outcomes, we would see less dependency on the leader. We would see more dependency on the team, and leaders putting their teams up for to give them the opportunity to shine, because we're all about putting others first. Number 6, persuasion and influence. This is not coercion. This is not a negative thing. This is how a leader thinks about buy-in, about how they get work done through really positive and successful means. This really drives empowerment in their teams. What would you see behavior-wise? You would see fewer top-down edicts. You would see less fist pounding. You would see less, this is what we're going to go do, and a whole lot more decision by the team. Again, if we looked at employee engagement scores, we're going to see high team commitment here. Number 7, the commitment of the growth of the people. On my team, everybody has a professional and career development plan. I believe in them. I want them. I read them, not only for my direct reports, but during skip levels. These are really, really important elements. And so for me, my goal is I want to see my team members not only as humans, but also as partners, not as instruments, not as a tool that can be used and abused. I want to invest in their personal growth. And so I often read these professional growth plans as we're thinking about succession, or we're talking about open roles, to make sure that individuals that have that interest, that may not get that visibility, I'm providing them that opportunity. So behaviors that you might see. Again, everybody should have a development plan. What about mentoring and coaching? Are people asking for it? Are people engaging in it? And outcomes. We would see a higher promotional rate for a particular leader. We would see skills being understood, discussed, and then worked on from either an experience, exposure, or education perspective. And satisfaction with a particular leader would be high. And the last one for intrinsic is building community. As a leader, it's my job to collaborate and have a shared purpose, not only with my team, but others around me that I serve. A servant leader focuses on a body of individuals, not themselves. And we're not interested in creating silos. We're interested in creating belonging and purpose and interdependence. So how do we see that? We typically see cross-team initiatives. I'll bet you've worked for a company, maybe you currently work for a company, where silos just happen. Sometimes it's on purpose, and other times it's just part of the culture. But trying to go cross silos is where the real challenge is. Servant leaders who understand building community will work really hard to build bridges across silos and build tunnels to the other silos. You would see shared rituals and meetings with other groups. You would see team and social events with other groups, not just your own. And outcomes, you'd see high collaboration scores, and you would see greater innovation and satisfaction with a particular leader. All right, so we've gotten through the intrinsic part of it. And you might say, well, my gosh, that's a lot. Matt, how do you select leaders? Well, here's one of the ways I select leaders. If you work in an office, or if you even have a home office, you have this next particular opportunity. And one of the ways that I do is I stay around and I watch the sink. The sink in the break room or the sink at home is a great metaphor and understanding of how we should be selecting leaders. And if you understand sink and what goes in sinks, it's dishes. And oftentimes people just throw their dishes in there after lunch. And many times they come back to after lunch and mysteriously those dishes are clean. I know in my house, we try to rotate that. But what I look for in leaders around the sink is the individual who doesn't have dishes in the sink, or they brought a dish to the sink and realized that nobody's watching, but they wash all of the dishes in the sink, whether they're theirs or not. And to me, the individual that's willing to take the extra 5 minutes to put the dishes on the drying rack or hand dry them, that's acts of service. That's servant leadership. That's an individual that understands care and purpose and community and all of the in listening, all of the things we just talked about. That's an individual that's got a great head start on understanding how servant leadership impacts them and what they need to work on. So if you're looking for somebody, watch the sink. Watch individuals who pick up trash on the floor. Again, these are individuals that have strong internal character. The last part here I want to talk about is extrinsic elements to servant leaders. How can we look at these characteristics and as we leaders look outwards? Helping others grow and succeed. Now these feel sometimes a little bit like they could be both, but here I want to make sure that we're looking outwards. You know, this is an individual that dedicates in commitment to the success of others. They have this is part of their purpose statement. It may be something you hear them say. They are interested in asking questions about how they can help somebody grow, or maybe it's hey, they're in a meeting. They say, "Hey, how can I help?" I think one of the most powerful statements we can say as leaders to our leader and ourselves to our people is, "How can I help you?" This is an outward display. This is me working on an intrinsic care element internally and how I bring an external to others. So how would I measure this? So percentage of teammates with growth plans on a particular team, coaching hours that I engage in, the leader engages in. This is not a selfish thing. This is me giving of my time, mentoring that comes up. And so outcomes here, we would see skills grow in individuals, and we would see high performer retention. This one? Oh. Number 3, ethical behavior. I think there are different parts of our macro world, and I won't get into it, that could really use a dose of ethical behavior right now. This is internal core that shows up external around trust and as a way to that character comes forth. And you say, well, what are ethical behaviors? It's doing the right thing, not only at the sink when nobody's looking, but doing the right thing when people are looking. And so we would expect to see percent commitment met on time. We would see strong stakeholder analysis that's equitable and fair. We would see diverse choices. We would see ethics training and living out those objectives. Outcomes, we would see misconduct with a particular leader would be low. There wouldn't be negative ethical things said about a leader. They may not listen well, but there wouldn't be anything unethical about them. Next one, number 4, putting others first. It's off. There's lots of books. Simon Sinek wrote the book "Leaders Eat Last," right? And I think that's really important. And it's something I do, not telling you this because I'm bragging, but it's just something I do. Is at an elevator, I let everybody else get on the elevator. I try to get to work early, and as I'm doing that, I want to make sure that people have opportunity to get on because a lot of folks aren't punctual and on time, and so I want to give them an opportunity to get on. But I work hard to put others first. And so, how would we want to measure that? So we would see uh, percent of decisions with documented frontline input. We would see office hours that leaders are dedicating to others, not themselves. So for me, I block time on my calendar to support and help others. It's just one of the tactics that I do. And outcomes, we would see high manager NPS. We would see engagement scores around help. And we would see team engagement would be really, really high. Emotionally healing, right? We talked a few slides ago about internal emotional healing and support. Let's talk about external. This is empathy in action, right? So we want to drive as leaders psychological safety, and this often helps to reduce burnout. It increases resilience, which also drive performance and ultimately get to the bottom line, which as leaders, that's part of how we're measured. And so these are important things. How would we measure it? We would see one-on-one cadence adherence, meaning these meetings aren't getting canceled, that the employee is finding it beneficial. We would see referrals to EAP. So often leaders, we have a teammate that's struggling or suffering, or the family is, and we want to refer them to different EAP programs or well-being resources, and that's important. That's us helping to provide those. And so the outcome here is a high psychological safety score, low burnout index, and we would see teammates, again, being highly engaged. Number 6, conceptual skills. This is a leader not always leaning into their technical side, but their spidey senses, their experiences, their systems thinking to be able to help teammates understand where things might go. I often call these pro tips. And so as I'm talking to those that report to me or others on the team, I often say, hey, do you mind if I give you a pro tip? I like to lead with a question of give them the opportunity to say no. Maybe now's not a good time, but it gives them an opportunity then to say yeah. And I talk through, hey, just in my experience using this word, or this is the situation, be careful about how you deliver a particular item. It often helps people with the wisdom of things. And I've had several teammates come back to me and say, hey, you were right. I appreciate that. Not that I was looking to be right, but it's an opportunity for me to speak into their lives from 30 years of working and learning development, of not wanting them to be in the pitfall, but also learn the lessons so they don't do it in a way that causes harm. So how do you measure this? You would see initiatives that have clear problem statements, that there's resolution early in the process instead of late in the process. High success metrics, and you would have definite risk plans that are really kind of those down the road sort of wise foreshadowing elements. And so outcomes, you would have high strategy execution rate, on time, on quality, and very little rework in projects. Number 7, creating value. Now, this is for the community. This is for the team. This is beyond often the organization. So one of the things I do is we have a recognition program at work, and what I work and have the team do quarterly is we take 4 weeks out of a month. The first week we give kudos to each other. The second, we give kudos within our departments of talents or learning. The third week we give kudos to the HR departments, and then the fourth month we give kudos to the organization. And so what I'm trying to drive there is the extrinsic charge and ask of the team to give and create additional value by giving kudos to others outside of themselves. How can we measure this? We can see volunteer hours, not only during work hours, but outside of work hours. And at Truist, we do a great job with volunteer hours. We would see folks volunteering for projects that are launching to learn new skills. We would How do you see outcomes? We would see high reputational scores for leaders. We would see community impacts. We would see emails sent. We would see new relationships unlocked as part of this. So that concludes the extrinsic part. So let's come back to where we started. So um, we know that the typical program that is developed for leadership development includes two parts: performance and managerial, metrics and action, being able to lead teams. But as I said early on, I said, let's look at new ways of infusing character into things. And so that's what my encouragement is, because I believe we build leadership programs for leaders, future leaders, who are leading people through service, not just leading people. They're learning the business to drive performance, but in a model that makes sense, that's ethical, that's right, that's just. And to me, character counts. And so back to my father's comments, we're going to do it when no one's looking. We're going to do it regardless of what others think. We're going to carry chairs because I believe that is the secret sauce. So oftentimes in this conversation, people say, well, how have you seen it done? I can't show you the exact example because I would be breaking some ethical boundaries, but I can show you a representation of how I've seen it done well. I've seen succession packets look like this, right? The name of the individual is actually not on the document. In the upper left-hand corner, it would be person one, person two. That removes all sorts of characteristics around biases, because I know who the individual is. And so the document is built around performance, managerial, and character, but we are voting on that, not being brought in and making decisions based on the individual and their name and other biases. So at the top, you see quotes about this individual. They go above and beyond. They never fail to raise their hand or volunteer. These are things we want to see in an organization. And often these are things that align in an organization, meaning as you're developing a program, these are key to your culture. Maybe your culture values community more than anything else. Maybe your culture values feedback. Maybe your culture values care. These are quotes that would align to that. On the bottom is, you see basic meters. It's not lots of numbers. It's basically indicators of where they fall: strategic, team, and business impact. Behind it is numbers. Behind it is assessment criteria. But it's a really simple and easy way to reflect that out. And then the top servant leader behaviors on the left-hand side. So the last thing is, again, leaders have two jobs: serve people as managers and improve performance. And I'm encouraging you, as instructional designers, as talent professionals, as humans, that you should think about developing new programs that add that secret sauce of character. There are ways of doing it. It might take a little bit more, but I think just like running, it takes a while to get there, but ultimately there's long-term success and health benefits. And so as professionals, as talent professionals, as learning professionals, this gives HR evidence to choose the right people and the programs that we build. So I want to thank you for your time. Again, here on screen is the QR code to my LinkedIn profile. Would love to meet you there. So I'm going to pause. What questions do you have? If you want to drop them in chat, if you would be happy to take those. I don't know if you can come off mute, but would love to answer some questions.
We can't come off mute, but you guys are welcome to throw your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section.
I see my friend Eileen out there. Hi, friend. I'll pause for another minute in case someone's typing.
All I see is praise, Matt.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, I'll kick it back to you, Casey.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, Matt. That was incredible. And thank you all for joining us. That's it. That wraps up ELBX Online. It's been a blast. We still have 2 more weeks of great content for you before we wrap up the year. So please make sure you check out our website to see what's next from us. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you guys so much.